Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Popoola. And if you're wondering about that surname, it's a Nigerian name. So now you know where I'm originally from. I'm here this evening to talk about how Vue.js made me like JavaScript. And well, I used to be a JavaScript hater, confession. And that's basically because of my background. What was my background? I started off as an accountant. And while I was practicing as an accountant, I fell in love with computers. And then thus began my development experience. So I've been a developer and partly a DevOps for 15 plus years. So you can see that I'm coming from an angle, the back-end side of things. I've worked with a number of technologies, mainly PHP, and at various times Python, Java, touched a bit of Ruby because, mostly because of the DevOps part of my work, as well as played around with Android for a while. While working with PHP, I worked with Zen Framework, Symfony, and lately started working with Laravel in the last 2 years. And obviously other platforms. Now, JavaScript and I, the past. You can see you can see how angry this guy is. And do you know why he's angry? Because this guy had explicitly told recruiters, whenever anybody tells you they want me, tell them I don't do JavaScript. And then these guys call me and they will tell me, Steve, we've got this job and it's meant for you. And then I tell them, okay, send me the specs. And then the first thing I see is, must have worked with JavaScript for 5+ years. And that was my past. And, I'd say, look, if you get me a job, don't even mention JavaScript. I don't do JavaScript. So, at some point, I decided to have a go at this JavaScript thing. But learning JavaScript was painful. And why was it painful? Because number one, I was, by virtue of my experience with different programming languages, one of the first things you want to do when you pick up a programming language is to look at specification. And many years ago, there was no proper specification for JavaScript. It was just, haywire. It was just here and there. And even when you were brave enough to look at the specs, God help you if you could understand half of the things that you're reading, and that was me. And obviously, there weren't many, JavaScript books. I remember that there was one book that everybody used to recommend, and I think it was called the Definitive Guide of JavaScript. That was the only book everybody told you to go and read. Apart from that, there were a lot of JavaScript books. You pick them up, and you don't really gain much from them. And of course, another wonderful thing about JavaScript, have 10 developers and give them the same task, and you will see different organizations of their code. And every one of them will tell you that that's the best way to do it. And obviously, the lovely one, dealing with browser incompatibilities. So you can see why this guy said, I told you, no JavaScript. So at some point in my life, I began the JavaScript journey. And you can see from here, there was Backbone, there was Angular, there was Ember, there was jQuery, and there were a lot more that I just didn't choose to mention because I probably just picked them up, had no clue, and dropped them. And then I finally got a job as a senior backend developer. Went to work the first day, and guess what? My first assignment, or my first task, was a Backbone.js project. What? And I remember telling the CTO, excuse me, I think there's a problem here. And he said, what's the problem? I'm a backend developer. He said, so what's the problem? The assignment given to me is a Backbone.js. I don't even know what a backbone is. Talk less of actually coding in Backbone.js. Is that supposed to be a joke? And the guy said, well, we told the recruiter we needed somebody with a lot of experience with backend, but but we will be willing enough to learn on the job. And I knew I was in trouble. So my first front-end related job, can you imagine how unfair that is? My JavaScript was crappy at best. And then you launch me into the deep end of Backbone.js. And if anybody has, please, how many of us have used Backbone.js here? Oh, good. And I'm sure you know that Backbone.js is like a blank canvas. So that was my first job. Half the time, I had no clue what I was doing. The good news there was that we had people who were just front-end developers. And I made life a living hell for them because, I mean, why would you give me a job meant for these guys? And they are there doing some other stuff. And so every minute I'm always going to them and ranting about how, backend programming languages don't do this and don't do that. Why would I see a class? And you're telling me that an object is a first class, a function is a first class object, or what? I was just confused. So, what happened? I was given my first task, create a scrollable TV guide. Just like the one you see when you tune on your Sky News or whatever, and then you're scrolling the channels. It was a media streaming company. Okay, so I started. And after much head banging, I completed the task. I was so proud of the feat I accomplished. Yes, I did it. Now I'm a JavaScript guru. Everybody patted me on the back. Good job, Steve. We knew you could do it. Yeah. That was until somebody remembered IE. And this was what happened. Imagine weeks of work, sleepless nights, and this is what I get for all my labor. A blank page. Now, tell me, why would you want to love a language that does this to you? Anyway, after that, other libraries, jQuery. I remember the first time I was given an assignment. And funny enough, one of the people I worked with is here right now, Richard. We work together in the same company. And in that company, I was told to, create a form on a page, on the home page, and make sure that when people submit whatever they are submitting, they don't leave that page. Now, this is somebody who doesn't do JavaScript. So I went to another colleague of ours, and I said, well, I can create HTML, a page in HTML. I can do all the backend stuff. But what I can't do for the life of me is have the user submit the form and stay right there. How am I supposed to do that? And the guy said, use jQuery. I said, what's that supposed to mean? It's, jQuery. Does JavaScript have some way of querying the database? And he said, no, sit down. Let me just show you. And then we sat down. And then I saw this weird $ stuff, document dots, ready with open. And I had no clue what he was doing. Over time, I learned jQuery, and used quite a bit of it. And sometimes get things done, sometimes don't get things done. And it's worse when you decide to use a plugin that you have no clue what the author did. Ember. Yeah, I looked at it. It looked slick, lovely, powerful. But after one day of going through it, I said, nah. Learning curve was too deep. And by that time, I was getting too old to start having sleepless nights trying to learn a language. Angular. I picked up Angular. Initially, I loved it. It was great. Google was behind it. So what could be bad about it? And then by the time I finished, now listen, by the time I finished the Angular 1 tutorial, and I thought I knew what Angular was all about, I was told Angular 2 was on its way in. So don't even bother trying to implement anything with Angular 1. And I said, okay. And while I was waiting for Angular 2 to be released, I began to hear things about Vue.js. I said, another library again. Oh, come on, give me a break. Anyway, then came Vue.js. And obviously, because I use Laravel a lot, Vue.js obviously became something that I needed to look at. And then I looked at it. And for the first time, I kid you not, for the first time, I began to see JavaScript in another light. Not just another light, and maybe coincidentally, because as at that time that I began to look at Vue.js, was also the time that the ES6, the ECMA standard for, the version 6 came out. And I was looking at that too, and I saw, for the first time, I started seeing some patterns emerge. I could create objects that I could understand, that I could manipulate, that I can use. I saw things like the arrow function, and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, this looks good. Let's have a go at this. And this was when I started. So within one day, I looked through the manual, and within one day, I was able to create my own Vue.js app. Just one day. And I'm not talking of watching, a tutorial or reading a tutorial and doing it. No, just read through the first few pages about reactivity, set up your data, and all that. And it was all done and dusted. The more I learned Vue.js, the more I learned JavaScript. How do you explain that? I explain that this way. And I may be wrong because there are a lot of you guys here who are smarter than I am. But I have a way I think. There's a way my thought process goes. When I start creating a Vue.js app, one thing I realize is Vue.js doesn't, it's kind of like it doesn't obstruct my logic. It says, if you want your data to be reactive, put it here. Whatever business logic you want to implement, you've got methods to implement them. If you want your data to be displayed in a particular way, you've got computed properties. Now, this is me that I had no clue what JavaScript was some years ago, but I could understand this clearly. It was clear to me. So that's why I tell you that the more I learned Vue.js, the more I learned JavaScript, because now I could write my applications the way that I understood. It wasn't strongly opinionated like some other libraries that will say, look, if you want this particular place to be dynamic, then you've got to do it this way or do it that way. What was my attraction to Vue.js? Ease of entry, gentle learning curve. That was what I've been looking for all these years. That was why I hated JavaScript, because I didn't even know it well in the first place before I was thrown in the deep end. And that was frustrating for me. But for the first time, I came across a library that helped me understand what I was doing. One thing that I used to rate most libraries and packages is in their documentation. Sometimes people lose me when I read their manuals, no matter how lovely their code base is. If your manual is crappy, then it tells me that, because the thing is, if the manual is good, even if the code is not very good, at least you'll be able to use it to achieve your purpose. But if your code is so good, but your manual is not good, then how are you supposed to solve your problems? Fast-growing community of developers. Here you are, guys. Helpful. And that's one thing that, I love about it. Available plugins and libraries. Now, I said something earlier that learning Vue.js helped me learn, JavaScript. When I was using some of these other libraries like, jQuery and others, I don't even want to bother giving myself headache trying to figure out what jQuery was doing under the bonnet. All I know is it says if you want to do this, do that. I just go to the API, look at what the API says I should do, and I do it, and that's it. But with Vue.js, one thing I've tend to do, most often than not, is if you want to solve a problem, there's a high percentage that somebody has solved that problem and put it on GitHub. And you can actually go through it, read through it, and actually understand what the person has done. And so sometimes, what I've found out is I tend not to even use those plugins and libraries. I just look at how they were able to implement it, and I do the same myself. And that helps me a great deal. Cross-browser compatibility. Now, I no longer have to bother my head about IE not rendering or Safari doing its own thing. Sometimes there are a few niggling pains here and there. And those are not due to Vue.js. Those are due to JavaScript's implementation of certain things. But then even now, the specification is looking a lot better now than it used to be. So sometimes I'm able to go there and see, which browsers support certain, code structures. No need for repetitive and messy DOM operations. I remember one of the most difficult things for me to do is when someone says, I need to have a dynamic table, and I'm using jQuery. So I have buttons, edit, delete, and so on like that. And then for each of those lines, I have to have a data ID equals this, and then I have to pass that. And then when I do my AJAX call, when my response comes, I need to remember which line, I need to update, which row I need to update. With Vue.js, I don't even need to do that anymore. Once I've got my template and I've got my reactive data, Vue.js does the rest for me. So, JavaScript and I, present day. How do we look like? We're not in love yet, but we are no longer enemies, thanks to Vue.js. The more I learn Vue.js, the more JS concepts I understand. Vue.js has now become my de facto JS library for providing front-end interactivity. And recently, just to give myself a boost, confidence, to really know how much of Vue.js I've known, I stripped one of my projects of all jQuery functionality and replaced it with Vue.js, and nothing broke. And this is a site that I used jQuery for before, and now it's powered by Vue.js. Each of these is a component on its own. And that tab there is a component of its own. And I was able to do this because I understood what I was doing. Yeah, most often people tend to say, oh, developers are lazy, so that's why certain things have to be in place. But while I was thinking about all this, I came up with my own quote, and I said, developers are not lazy. They just want a tool that is simple but powerful enough to do their jobs quickly. Thank you.